Thanks, guys. I don't know how to thank you. I'm really sorry you got mixed up in my problems. I should have handled things better. What happened anyhow, if you don't mind telling us? I mind, but you need to know. I caught Janice in the middle of having it with another man. She didn't even know I was there. I placed my wedding ring where I was sure she would find it and left. Damn, boss, I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. I have no idea how someone would be able to deal with something like this. I've already dealt with it, Maggie. Just like that? That quick? How? Well, I got stinking a drunk and I've had a good cry. All that's left now is the aftermath. That shouldn't amount to too much. I don't understand. How can it be over that quick? How can you stop loving someone that easy? I do still love her, but my marriage is over. Look, I have a philosophy of sorts. I've always thought if I were to walk in on something like that and she was being the son of a bee wouldn't leave the room alive. However, if he was there at her invitation, then I would flip him a quarter and tell him to go get a good piece when he was done with her. I forgot about the quarter, but I did remember to leave my wedding ring. I've done all that needs to be done. Mike had sat there long enough without saying anything, but he had to ask, "Damn, Jim, don't you want revenge? Shouldn't they be made to pay for their betrayal? To what end, Mike? I'm not going to jail just because she decided she doesn't love me anymore. Why should I carry the guilt of harming someone over something as simple as a piece of for the rest of my life? That's all. It was two consenting adults, trying to have a good time. They haven't harmed me physically, so why should I harm them? They'll probably destroy themselves sooner or later anyway." Well, you're certainly being awful cold about it. Maggie, I'm going to go see my boss in a little bit and then I'll get a motel room somewhere. I won't be at work next week. Just pile the important stuff on my desk and I'll deal with it when I get back. You're welcome to stay here if you want. We've got a spare bedroom and you won't be any trouble. Thanks for the offer, Maggie, but I have some things to work out. I think I need to be alone for a while. I got up and left. They tried to convince me to stay, but I wanted to be alone. Maggie said she would take my suit to the cleaners Monday morning and hang it in my office when she picked it up. They were super good people and I wasn't about to impose on them any more than I already had. I spent a little over 2 hours with my boss, at his home. I took him up on the offer to move and supervise the large one-year project he offered me a few weeks ago. When we were done, he told me to see the firm lawyer and then take a month off if I wanted. I went to the firm's lawyer after talking with my boss. Janice and I each had our own checking, savings and 401k accounts. We each contributed to the household account and she could have that. In her position, she made more than I did, so her accounts were larger. All I wanted was what was mine and I made that plain to my lawyer. He made arrangements for someone to pick up my work computer, clothes, and a few personal items. I refused to see Janice. I'm sure she would have had a lot to say. I didn't have anything to say. I had said it all when I returned my wedding ring to her. Did I still love her? Of course I did. One doesn't fall out of love overnight. Would I ever see her again? I hope not. The pain would be more than I could bear. Did I hate her? No. I hated what she did to us. I'm sure she had her reasons, but nothing she could say would change what she had done. I filled the tank on the car and left for the cabin. It was owned by one of my college buddies and he said I could use it anytime I wanted. He claimed the fishing was excellent there and I was going to find out. Everyone has his or her own idea of what paradise should be. This was mine. The large one-room cabin looked down on a small lake. There wasn't even a dock to disturb the beauty. A small rowboat was tied to a tree and the simple wooden bench sitting under the tree was actually a lot more comfortable to sit on than it looked. I know, because I had spent a lot of time on that bench, contemplating my life and options. This would be my last night here. The cabin, though crude, had provided the peace and serenity I needed. A well with an old-fashioned hand pump supplied water. A large propane tank provided for cooking and heating. There was no electricity. 2 old-time coal oil lamps gave off all the light necessary. The bathroom was nothing more than an outhouse, located a good 50 yards behind the cabin. The screened-in front porch looked south across the 300-acre lake. Bathing options were not limited. You could use the large galvanized washtub on the back porch, or you could jump in the lake and wash with the turtles and fish. If you wanted a hot bath, you heated water in a bucket on the stove and then dumped it into the tub. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. A 10-mile trip every other day to the closest town kept 2 large coolers full of ice for milk and meat products. The fishing varied, according to what one liked. Channel cat, bullheads, bass, crappie and sunfish provided hours of entertainment. It was time for me to move on. I had a new life waiting on me 1,000 miles away. Maybe there was something or someone waiting on me there. It had been a long, hard year. Work, eat and sleep. If it weren't for Maggie and Mike, I don't think I could have made it. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Work just went on and on. The first thing I did was to buy a large gooseneck camper and a Dodge, dual-wheel, 4-wheel drive pickup to pull it. I parked it next to the engineering trailer, hooked into the site power supply, and that's where I lived. The second thing I did was to con my boss into convincing Maggie and her husband to join me. Mike had worked in the construction trade all of his life. I talked to the main contractor and had Mike hired on as a crew supervisor. By the end of the first month, he was the shift coordinator for all 3 shifts. The main contractor was damn glad to have him. The busy work schedule was good for me. It wasn't unusual for someone to pound on my door at 2 in the morning because of some difficulty that had come up. I would solve their problem and maybe manage to get back to sleep before the day crew arrived at 8. It kept me from thinking about things that I wanted to forget anyway. I hadn't seen or spoken to Janice since that fateful day in the hotel room, a year ago. She had relentlessly tried to see or talk to me for several months afterward, but I had steadfastly refused. I wanted nothing to do with her or her explanations. Maggie had presented me with several letters from Janice over a period of time, and I had her return them unopened. Maggie decided that all work and no play made Jimmy a dull boy and an irritable boss. She insisted I accompany her and Mike to a nice restaurant every Saturday night, regardless of the workload. She was partly successful. I did manage to meet and date a couple of nice ladies. However, they were looking for a long-term relationship and I was unwilling to commit. I guess I sort of felt like, once burned, twice shy. My boss had another long-term project all lined up. I would take a long vacation, spend a month at the home office to review specifications and then head for the new site. Maggie and Mike were to take a long vacation and then go to the site and start on preliminary work. I would join them as soon as my work at the main office was done. We said goodbye early on a Wednesday morning. I hitched up the trailer, fired the Dodge up and headed for home. Home, that was a joke. There wasn't a home waiting on me anymore. I had instructed my lawyer to give it to Janice. She had a lot more invested in it than I did. I took time to do a little sightseeing along the way and pulled up next to the cabin a week later. It wasn't like I left it. My buddy had managed to get electricity to the cabin and he had installed a small bathroom and a shower. Other than that, everything was the same. Well, not quite. He had installed a large refrigerator. That eliminated the trip to town every other day for ice. He worked for a large corporation and was currently in Europe, doing whatever it is a lawyer involved in mergers and acquisitions does. I had the place all to myself. After 2 weeks, I had endured all the peace and quiet I could stand. The drive from the cabin to the home office wasn't all that much fun. There were too many memories there and not nearly enough water had flowed under the bridge, so to speak, to erase them. I found a small campground not far outside the city, parked the camper and started making my boss happy. I ended up in the bank a few days later. My salary, which was good to start with, had substantially increased. My living expenses had decreased. The project had come in on time and under budget. To make matters better, I was holding a real nice bonus check as a reward for a job well done. I wasn't the only one with a bonus check. The main contractor had given Mike a nice little check and a hell of a good recommendation for his next employer. I made sure my boss made out a nice check for Maggie as well. She more than deserved it. Standing in line, whether in a bank or any other place, is boring. I was gazing around, wishing I were somewhere else, when I saw Janice come around the corner of a hallway. She stopped dead in her tracks, halfway smiled and made a little wave with her hand. I stared at her and didn't wave back. She started to walk toward me and I slowly shook my head. Her face contorted and she turned around and hurried back the way she came. I guess I should have changed banks a year ago. At the time, there just didn't seem to be any need to do it. Seeing her sure ruined my day. I managed to conclude my business and left, contemplating whether I should change banks. It was late on a Friday night and the 10 o'clock news had just finished when I remembered I had a gift to deliver. 5 minutes found the package and 20 minutes later, I was pulling up in front of Bear's Bar. Stepping through the door, I had to stop and orient myself. The large bar that used to sit in front of the door had moved about 10 paces to the left and it was much larger. Everything had increased in size. The dining area had been moved to the far left. Then the bar, then a very large social area, and the whole place was much deeper. I was pleased to see that Bear hadn't increased in size. He was large enough already. He was sitting in his usual place at the far end of the bar. The only thing that really stood out was a very beautiful blonde lady sitting in the number 1 booth. A young black man was talking intently with her. I walked up and gave Bear my usual greeting. "Hey, Bear, you been behaving yourself? Well now, Jim, long time, no see. Got a little something for you, big guy." I handed him a small gift that was covered with fancy wrapping, including a bright yellow bow. He delicately removed the wrapping, exposing a small bright red box. Inside was a copy of The Courtship of Miles Standish by Longfellow. It was a small book, measuring 3.75 inches by 5.25 inches, and it was only 5/8 thick. It had to have been printed in the early 1900s. The box, like the book, was in pristine condition. I thought for just a moment Bear was going to get emotional, but he steeled himself and mumbled something to the effect that I shouldn't have. It took a while to get caught up. A lot had happened to the bar and a lot had happened in it. I told him about my job for the past year, and when he asked about my family, I summed it up in one word: divorced. That's too bad, Jim. Anything I can do to help? Nah, it's over and done with. I've accepted that and moved on with my life. You can tell me that, but your eyes say different. You still love her, don't ya? Yes, damn it, I do, but I can't trust her. Hell, Bear, you know how it is. All the love in the world can't overcome even a moment of mistrust and betrayal. It makes no difference if it was just once, or hundreds of times, the bridge is burned. You can't cross back, Bear, ever. What about forgiveness, Jim? You know, she asks, you give her another chance and start building again. Can't do it, Bear, just can't do it. Can't, or won't? Makes no difference, the hurt is too much, the pain goes too deep. I can't get past it. Again, Jim, can't, or won't? I don't know, damn it. I saw her briefly the other day. You know, at a distance. It tore me up inside. I wanted to go over and kiss her, and yet at the same time I wanted to beat the hell out of her. What am I going to do, Bear? I don't know, buddy. All I can tell you is to follow your heart. That's where you'll find your answers. The young black guy that had been talking to the blonde in the number 1 booth got up and left. Bear watched him leave, seemed to consider for a moment, and then turned and asked, Jim, would you do me, and yourself, a favor? You see that blonde lady sitting over there? She's a very good friend of mine. Her name is Gail. Go over, sit down, and tell her your story. All of it. Don't leave nothing out. Start with when you first dated Janice, and don't stop till you get to where you walked in here tonight. If she has any questions, answer M. Okay? Why, Bear? What good will that do? It may not do any good at all. Look, Jim, we've been friends for years. I've never asked you to do anything for me in the past. I'm asking you now, please? I had to consider for a little bit. Bear seldom asked for anything, but when he did it was usually for a very good reason. Besides, I owed this man. He had done me a few favors back in my wild and glorious youth. Okay, fine. I finished the last swallow of my now warm beer, walked over to the booth, sat down and said, Hello, my name is Jim, and Bear says I gotta talk to you. She closed her laptop, flipped to a new page in a large notebook, and looking at me expectantly, replied, Hello Jim, my name is Gail. Please begin. I began with the first time I saw Janice. I told her everything I could think of. The places we went, things we did, wedding, honeymoon, intimate details I had never told anyone else. Married life, love, trust, future plans and goals. I hadn't even started when a fresh beer appeared as if by magic in front of me. The only time she spoke was to clarify something I had said. I talked for 3 hours. By the time I was done, the table was half covered with empty beer bottles. One of the bouncers came over, helped me to my truck, and drove me back to my camper. He must have had one of his buddies follow us because he was gone the next morning when I woke up. I had a bit of a hangover, but it was tolerable. Things went pretty slow at work for the next few days. We didn't cover a lot of ground, and if we kept this pace, it would be at least 2 months before I could leave for the new site. I got a call from Bear late Friday afternoon, asking if I could stop by the bar later that night. I checked my social calendar and, finding I didn't have one, agreed to have supper with him at 8. Supper. That brought back memories. 1 ate breakfast in the morning, right after you got up. You had dinner along about noon, and supper was the evening meal. Lunch was something you took to school, or work, in a paper sack and ate during the noon hour. If Bear invited you to dinner, you better show up along about noon. If you waited till 6 or 7 that evening, you were just that many hours too late. I found Bear on the dining room side of the bar in his own personal booth. I started to needle him about it when I noticed Mrs. Bear sitting on the other side of the table. That changed things immensely, most notably, my behavior. Bear was large, loaded with muscles, and the way he carried himself made you respect him. Besides, no one wanted him as an enemy. Mrs. Bear, on the other hand, was medium in height, slender, had dark skin that appeared to be as smooth as fine silk, and the face of an angel. You could add to that, a musical voice, a heartwarming smile, and laughing eyes that danced right into your heart. You respected her because you couldn't make yourself feel any other way. The stunning blonde that Bear made me talk to last weekend soon joined us, accompanied by her husband, Paul. I think her name was Gail. We had a delicious meal of fish and fries, accompanied by a very fine wine. Talk around the table covered many subjects. Bear lost his street dialect and actually talked like the college graduate he was. Normally, he used street talk and the slang of the area so his customers would feel more at ease. It was amusing when he would unconsciously mix proper English in with street talk during the course of a conversation. I learned a little bit about Gail. She was a famous author, and although I don't read much fiction, I had heard of her. She encourages people to tell her their stories and sometimes uses them in her novels. She is always very careful to change names, dates, locations, and anything else that might identify who the real people actually are. Gail and Paul left, as did Mrs. Bear a few minutes later. That left Bear and I sitting there, staring at each other. The waiter came over and whispered something to Bear. "Well, Jim, I have a confession to make. Janice is waiting in privacy booth number 4 to talk with you. I apologize for springing this on you. You don't have to talk, but I would appreciate it if you would at least listen." "Why, Bear?" "Because you need to hear what she has to say." "Do you know what she's going to say?" "No, but Gail does. She managed to have supper with Janice the other night." So, Gail thinks you need to hear what Janice has to say. I trust Gail's opinion. Look, Jim, Gail and Paul were once where you are now. I personally know their story. They managed to get together and work their differences out. They are totally devoted to each other now. I trust Gail's intuition on these things. Look at it this way, what have you got to lose? I didn't say another word to Bear. I just got up, went to the bar and ordered a beer. I knew about the privacy booths. They were large, fully enclosed, sat against the wall, had a curtain that closed across the front, and if you talked in a reasonable tone of voice, no one else would be likely to hear what you were saying. The waiters didn't even bother you. There was a call switch on the wall. If you wanted something, you turned the switch on and someone would show up. The local pimps liked these booths. They were large enough to seat 8. They could go in there with their working girls to settle up after a night on the streets. More than one gang war had been prevented because the leaders, at Bear's insistence, had sat down in one of these booths and worked their problems out. I slipped through the curtain and slid into the right side of the horseshoe-shaped booth. A very good-looking Janice was sitting opposite from me. She certainly didn't look like she was suffering very much. I looked into her eyes and they were saying volumes before she opened her mouth to speak. Determination, uncertainty, and fear? Yes, just a touch of fear. "Hello, Jim, you're looking well." Silence. "Thank you for seeing me." Silence. "Please, Jim, I'm sorry." Determination, uncertainty, and fear had disappeared. All I could see now was regret. She scooted out of the booth and had started to open the curtain when I spoke. "Janice, please sit back down." I agreed to listen. "You have my undivided attention. Say what you came here to say." She seemed to hesitate for a moment and then came to some kind of a decision. She sat down, took a sip of whatever it was she was drinking, focused her eyes on something over my left shoulder and began speaking. "Jim, the first thing I must do is apologize to you, and I do so now most profusely. I shamelessly betrayed your trust in me. Worse than that, I have never been even remotely honest with you. My behavior toward you, our relationship and our marriage vows have turned into nothing but a lie. I should have told you of my past when we first met. I can only imagine the pain and anguish I have brought to you. For this I am truly sorry. I hope that someday you will be able to forgive me. What I am about to tell you is not offered as an excuse for my actions. There is no excuse, but you do deserve an explanation. What you are about to hear is not designed to create sympathy for me. Nor is it offered in hopes of us getting back together. I realize now that you were fully justified in leaving, and I've accepted that. I have no hope of us ever living together again. Why you deserve someone far better than me." A small tear had made its way halfway down her right cheek. Her voice was quivering and her speech was starting to break. She dug in her handbag for a tissue and dabbed at her eyes. I activated the call switch and had the waiter bring us fresh drinks. This was obviously going to be very difficult for her. So what, she was the one that wanted this meeting. She didn't have to be here. She could suffer through it or she could just leave. I really didn't give a damn which. She took a large drink, shifted her gaze to something over my right shoulder and continued. "Thank you for the drink. I think I'm going to need it and a few more before this is over. You don't have to do this, you know." "Yes, I do. You deserve to hear the truth." "Okay, then, I'm listening." It all started when I was a junior in high school. My stepfather gave me some adult drinks, and then you know what? Mom was visiting her sister that night and didn't get home until the next day. I told her what happened, expecting her to throw him out just like she did my father. My father beat and abused her. He started on me when I was 12. She saw the light, called the police, and we never saw him again. She remarried a couple of years later. She explained that my stepdad was very well off financially and it was up to us to take care of him in any way he wanted. After all, he was taking care of us and was even going to pay for my college education. She told me it wouldn't hurt for me to show my appreciation and be nice to him when he wanted me. Although he had been insistent, he had taken his time and tried to make it enjoyable for me. He didn't come to my bed very often, but when he did, I accommodated him. I even managed to enjoy his visits as time went on. He was always loving and thoughtful, never hurting me physically.